Hi, I'm Sarah Veblen. I've been teaching sewing, pattern making, fitting, design for many years, and I am producing a number of free YouTube videos to get my methodology out in the public sphere, so it helps any kind of garment sewer that comes along, hopefully. If you have any suggestions of topics you'd like me to cover, please email me. And today I will be talking about how to choose a pattern size when you're going to make a knit bodice. I've already done one on woven bodices, and when you're going to work with a knit fabric, it's a little bit different. So that's what we're going to delve into today. This is the knit pattern that I'm starting with. It's really old. It's not a special pattern. It's just for example purposes. And here on the back, I'm assuming that the person we're developing a pattern for has a 36-inch bust, and if we come up in the column, we can see that that is a medium size that the pattern company recommends. You can also see that this has a stretch guide, and some patterns have stretch guides and some do not that are for knits. I usually don't pay a lot of attention to that because I'm thinking about what type of knit that I want to use, and then I'll use that type of knit for my mock-up and in an inexpensive version of that, and size from there. The knit fabric that you are choosing to make your garment from is going to impact the size. That's what that stretch guide was for on the pattern envelope, but I like to take control of it from the get-go. This is a cotton poly interlock knit, and when I do a stretch test on it, you can see I'm holding down here and then I've pinched here. I'm on the fold of the fabric. I'm not on the cut edge. And I often will count off 4 inches. That's how I like to do it. And when I stretch it, it stretches to about 4.5, not quite 4.5. So it's what it naturally wants to give up. I can pull it further, but what the knit naturally wants to give up, let me get centered here again, from the 4 inches, what it naturally wants to give up is about 4.5 inches. And I've found that lots and lots of knits have this. So it doesn't have to be a cotton poly interlock. It could be a polyester ITY knit or something like that. So this is how I'm going to be sizing for this, is keeping this knit in mind. And then the next step is to take a look at our pattern. So here is the pattern front. It has the finished garment measurements. So if you sew an extra small with the designated seam allowance, which is 5/8 of an inch on this particular pattern, not all patterns have that seam allowance, but on this one it does. If you cut out an extra small and sew a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, the circumference at bust level around the entire body is going to end up being right around 34 inches. So with a medium, which is what the pattern called for, remember our medium 36 bust, they recommended a medium. If we look here on the medium, that means that the finished garment measurement is going to be 40.5 inches. And in my experience, that is a lot of ease. That's 4.5 inches of ease. What I have found over the years of fitting people and working on knit garments for myself, if I'm using a knit like the one I described, where you have about 1/2 inch of pull or stretch to it, that's what the knit naturally wants to give up. You want to choose a size that is about what your figure is at bust level. So for a 36-inch bust, I would definitely use the 36.5 inch bust finished garment measurement, and that puts me at a size small. And the reason for this, unlike a woven, your knit fabric is going to be giving up that amount of stretch or give all the way across the entire body. So from side seam to front, over to your other side seam, and then across and around your back. So in my experience, if you have a knit that has about this much stretch, give or take a little bit, the 4 inches might stretch to an inch and you would still be okay, or the 4 inches might stretch to a quarter, to an extra quarter of an inch, and it would still work. Then you want to be using a size where your finished garment measurement is quite close to your bust size. And this is true on all figure types. It depends, of course, on whether you like your garments tight fitting or loose fitting. So I normally would make up the garment in then using the small size here at the bust. You also are going to want to take into account both the waist, here's the waist of the pattern, and further down at the hip. Similar to working with a woven fabric, and there's a video on that, if I have determined my bust and then I need more room in the waist, I would grade out. Then I could come back down to the hip, or if I needed to go out for the hip, then I could blend that out. I show a lot of the blending in my video on choosing a bodice pattern size for a woven fabric, so you might find that helpful. But the main thing for me is to get this bust area about correct. And as I'm just going to recap, if you have a knit where you are testing the amount of stretch give to it, whichever way you think about it, how much the fabric wants to give up because it's a knit. If you're right in this ballpark, 4 inches stretches to 4 1/4, or 4 3/8, or 4 1/2, or 4 5/8, or 4 3/4, then you are going to want to choose a finished garment size at the bust that is similar, very, very close to your figure, and that the knit fabric is going to give you the amount of wearing ease you want. And so this is going to be for an everyday kind of garment. It's not loose and baggy, and it's not super, super fitted. If I've chosen the size small for the bust, I've already talked about the waist and the hip, I generally speaking am going to choose the size small for the armhole and the shoulder and the neckline. Remember, for the way I work and my methodology, what the main thing is to get a mock-up on you and to start the fitting process from there. Sometimes I'll need to take up the shoulder seam, I might need to lower or raise the neckline, I might need to carve the armhole out, but all of that I do in my first muslin fitting. And I would be using a knit that is inexpensive but has a very, very similar amount of give or stretch to it as our stretch test. So it doesn't have to be exactly the same, but very close to it. So we've chosen a size small on the front. We also are going to choose a size small for the back. At the neckline, the shoulder, the armhole, we'll take care of those in fitting. But for your side seam, you would come down here for the small, and then if you have widened or narrowed at the waist or the hip, you would do the same thing on the back that you would on the front. So let's talk about the sleeve for a knit pattern. First of all, we'll remember that for a woven sleeve, you want to take your bicep measurement, so right at the underarm, and then whatever that figure, that number is, say it's 13, then you want to add 2 inches of wearing ease for a woven fabric. But now we're talking about knits, and in my experience, generally speaking, if you choose a size that where the bicep measurement is just about a ½ inch, maybe an inch larger than your bicep, you're going to be in good shape. If you like a slender sleeve, you could choose a size that has a little bit less amount of ease. So about the same amount, or a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, depending on your preferences of fit. However, when you choose your pattern size, generally speaking, I like to go with the same size pattern as what the bodice was at the side seam at the underarm and going up to the shoulder. And here that would be the small. So for the small, I've measured in from the cut line in the 5/8 of an inch and made a mark here. I did it for the extra small as well, but we're going to work on the small. And then here from the small, I'm going to go from the cut line in the 5/8, and then I'm going to measure between those two lines. And when I measured it, this came out to be 12.5 inches. So for my arm, that would be sufficient. So for an arm that's 11 to 11.5 inches, the bicep, or even 12, this sleeve would fit really well. If your arm is larger than the size that you have chosen for the bodice, then I recommend going to a larger size, finding what dimension going across for the bicep level is going to give you just that little bit, quarter or half an inch of wearing ease, and then make that size pattern and put it into the sleeve, knowing that you're going to have a little bit too much to ease in, but at least your starting place will be comfortable across the bicep. Once you have determined the size and you have all of your pattern pieces cut out, ready to cut out your garment, I really recommend using a test fabric. It's a knit that has very similar amount of give or stretch as your fashion fabric. And as I said at the beginning, I often like knits that have about this much give or stretch, and so I have many of my patterns for knit garments. I use this type of knit as my base. It's inexpensive, it's easy to come by at Joann's and other stores, and so then I do my mock-up in this, and I keep a swatch of my mock-up fabric in the pattern envelope, and when I make my garment, I usually have a sheet of paper with the actual fashion fabric with a swatch, making any note as to whether I needed to alter the fit or not for that particular fabric. Then you develop a little reference library for yourself. I hope this information about choosing a size for a knit bodice has been helpful and that it gets you closer to where you want to be from the get-go. Thanks for joining me.